Hi, this is Dr. Richard Ruhling, here to welcome you to the Total Health Channel. Please like and share this with others as you're able. Topic for today is how we can get the highest possible reward if we understand how the covenant is overlooked in Christ's wedding parables. And I'll give you an illustration from a wedding message. There are four wedding messages written out in Scripture, but one that's an example. And that is Israel, when God took Israel from Egypt to Sinai, and he said, if you keep my covenant, you'll be a kingdom. And they said, yeah, we'll do it. And later in Jeremiah 3:14, he said, return to me, I'm married to you. Well, when did they get married? It must have been when they made the covenant. They accepted it. But they accepted it passively. They weren't really into it. And a month later, 40 days later, they were worshiping a calf. Bad deal. God had a bad bride, actually. And this must not happen to Christ, who's already paid a horrible price. And in Matthew 22, the king, who's God, makes a marriage for his son, Christ, and he sends his servants, that's us, to bid people to a wedding. And it says the remnant scorn the wedding invitation until the king sends his armies and burns up their city. Well, I'm coming from a Seventh-day Adventist background. That was how I was reared. I'm no longer recommending it as a church because as church is an apostasy, basically, and the prophet said that it would be an apostasy till the Lord comes. And they don't get it. She said they were copying the Jewish nation. The trials and attitudes of the Jews before the first advent represented to her the trials and experience of God's people before the second advent. So they have a lot of good teachings, but somehow for fellowship and understanding, they're closed, really, I believe, to important truth that I'll be sharing with you on this channel here. And it's really how we do the covenant. That is really her definition, Ellen White. And let me just say this. There are a lot of people, even Adventists, that don't understand Ellen White. But my school at Loma Linda was given $40 million for a study on why Seventh-day Adventists live about 7 years longer than other non-SDA outside the community. And I wish they'd have talked to me. I could have saved them some of that money because it was the writings of Ellen White. She wrote so accurately, actually 100 years before the Surgeon General said that smoking or tobacco causes lung cancer, she said it was a malignant poison. Her malignant poison he identified as cause of malignant tumors 100 years later. Kind of slow. And that's from this is coming from a woman who, as a third grader at school, had a serious injury when she turned to see some girl throwing a rock and it hit her right in the face. And she was in a coma for 2 weeks, not expected to live. She couldn't finish the third grade, and yet she gave her heart to God later, and he really did stuff for her. I mean, she was shown many things, and she could not have written. She has written more books than any other American author, okay? And one of her best-selling books has been translated into 160 languages. Well, I didn't mean to get into this, but the bottom line is I'm not trying to convince you to change churches, but I believe that her writings are accurate and of high value, and she defined the church as a covenant-keeping people, not a general conference corporation that owns the buildings, the schools, the churches, the hospitals, publishing houses, and so on. She was partly responsible for those, but that's not what makes a church. And she said what God purposed to do for the world through Israel, the chosen nation, he will finally accomplish through his church on earth today, even his covenant-keeping people. And to them will be fulfilled all the covenant promises made by Jehovah to that ancient people. Well, I'm going to be sharing an aspect or insights to this because this is not intuitive as to what the problems are. But bottom line is that if you look at covenants and how they were made, a key point is Abraham, who with whom God made a covenant. He wanted a covenant with Abraham. And in the Bible, there were two parties: the proactive person that wanted a deal, and the other party who accepted the deal and said, yeah, let's do it. And the proactive person gave 7 of something. And Abraham gave 7 ewe lambs to Abimelech for a water well. He wanted a covenant that the well was be his. And he says, I'm giving you these lambs as a witness. And they said, okay. And that was that. God gave Israel 7 feast days for the covenant he wanted at Sinai. I wondered why they call them feast days, but 7 different days in the year, Israel was down in Jerusalem, and they could sacrifice a lamb and feast on it for the week of Passover or the week of Tabernacles. They didn't have refrigeration, so they'd have to eat it up, I guess. But anyway, that's they called it feast days. And it was a time for fellowship. It was like a vacation, really, because they didn't have to work their garden or their crops. They went down for teaching in the spring before things got going, and then in the fall after the harvest was in. So nice deal for God to give 7 feast days, or Abraham to give 7 ewe lambs. And the idea, though, when God made a covenant with Abraham as a burning lamp, he went between the pieces of a sacrifice as if to say, anciently men would both walk between the sacrifice to say, may I be torn apart like this sacrifice if I don't keep my part of the bargain. Well, in this case, God alone went as a burning lamp. Abraham went to sleep. He didn't have any real responsibility. He could take the land or leave it. Well, fortunately, he took it and moved his family and household and etc., the people with him, to the promised land. Well, I'm seeing that we need to make a covenant, because in Luke's wedding parable, God has as a burning lamp went between pieces, but Luke says, have your lamps burning. Christ is wanting us to be proactive, not just a passive bride that says, yeah, we'll do whatever you say. And a good example of this is when they came back from Persia. They in the Feast of Tabernacles, they spent that week reading through the book of Deuteronomy, and then they renewed the covenant, and they says, we sign and seal to it. They signed their name. They said, we want this, and this is what we'll do. And I think Christ wants that from us. And I get the clues from Matthew 16, verse 12. Christ says, beware the leaven of Pharisees. Why? Because leaven makes the bread light. And he's talking about doctrines and teachings. And throughout history, first the rabbis in Jewish time and Christian preachers today, they leaven the bread. It is so light and easy, you can swallow that sermon without even thinking about it. It was just a nice story. But if you ask somebody a week later, what did they talk about last week? Well, I'm not really sure. Can't remember. We need information that needs thinking and chewing mentally. And one chapter after Christ said, beware the leaven of Pharisees, he said Elijah must come and restore all things. And we should wonder, what are the all things that Elijah is going to restore? And I'm seeing that clearly in Malachi 4 chapter, verse 4 and 5, God says, or Malachi says, remember the law of Moses with statutes and judgments. Behold, I send you Elijah. So Elijah is going to restore the statutes and judgments, and I've discovered that those statutes and judgments have a 7-fold emphasis in Ezekiel 20, where it is statutes, judgments, Sabbath, statutes, judgments, Sabbath, statutes, judgments, Sabbath. They're linked to Sabbath. And so those are topics that have a 7-fold emphasis, are like the book of Revelation for the end times. Revelation is the apocalypse that's coming, and things that have a 7-fold emphasis we need to understand. And there are topics, I'm seeing a cluster of 7 topics for the 7 days of unleavened bread, like when Israel left Egypt, they ate unleavened bread for 7 days. We're going to have to understand 7 topics for 7 days as part of our wedding covenant, I believe. And so, and I want to give you a couple examples. I said that these Israelites, when they came back from Persia, made a covenant and renewed it, and they sealed to it. Well, in Revelation 6, there are 7 seals, okay? And in the very next chapter, there is the sealing of the 144,000 who are special in heaven. They get to follow Christ wherever they go. And I believe it says in Revelation 14:4, they are virgins. Well, if the Bible explains itself, they must be the wise virgins in Matthew 25 that get into the wedding. And so if we want to be wise and have high reward like the 144,000 who get to follow Christ wherever he goes in eternity, I believe we're going to need to make a covenant with the 7 topics and that Christ wants that are what Elijah is restoring. We can have the function of Elijah to restore all things by making a covenant and being God's special people in the end time, if we're willing to die for them. You know, as anciently they said, may I be torn apart if don't keep my part of the bargain like these uh, like this sacrifice. Well, we want to keep the covenant, and I believe we can do that if we understand it well. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples right now. The red horse that takes peace from the earth, okay, with a great sword. And when God made a covenant with Israel in Exodus 34th chapter, verse 10 and 11, he said, behold, I make a covenant with you, and it's a terrible thing I'm going to do with you. I'm going to drive out the Canaanite. Well, if he would do it for them, he will do it for us. And I believe that we need to trust God that he can give us the land of the covenant in the time of the end when you cannot buy or sell or hide, and bad forces, I believe UN is the beast spoken of in the last part of Revelation 13. It is the image beast of the first beast in Revelation 13. And early Americans were unanimous that that first beast was the medieval church in the Dark Ages that burned them at the stake and tortured them in different ways to get them to convert. It's a bad system to force people. Forcing conversion is, Rome has done that historically from the days of the emperors. If people would not offer incense to the emperor and bow, they were given to the lions or different stuff. And the religious Rome power, Holy Roman Empire, absorbed many of those cultures and ideas, so that there was serious trouble against the Protestants. And if they were found having a Bible in their home, one from the Gutenberg press, that was the first book that was ever printed and available, but to be discovered that you had a copy which was forbidden, you get burned at the stake. Well, about that time, Columbus discovered America, and people were coming to this country. America was established as the second beast in Revelation 13, as a lamb-like beast, gentle, peace-loving, but 2 horns, but no crowns on the horns. The horns represented a government without a king, no crown, and a church without a pope, Protestants. That's what America was. But sadly, there has been an influx of millions of people that don't understand the Constitution and work ethic, and the Pope comes to our Congress to tell us how to run the country, when in reality he's got a big problem in South America. They all want to come here for a better life. And if he would just focus on his own country that is already Catholic, instead of trying to make America like everywhere else, it would be better. That's my opinion. And anyway, we need a covenant to be faithful to, and I'm seeing that the covenant is 7 topics basically. An incentive for Christ will be I just have been sharing with you a focus on the covenant. The second red horse takes peace from the earth, and when we have a covenant with Christ, peace will be taken from the earth again. It will be like war and trouble and persecution. But Christ can't come without that. We have to be willing to stand up for him, live for him well, and we can do that. So that's a perspective that the topics in Revelation 6th chapter of covenant, and the next one is a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny. Um, that's about famine, and in Isaiah 24th chapter, verse 5, um, because they didn't keep the law or rest the land every 7th year, the land was worn out and it wouldn't produce, and there was famine. And God sent them to Babylon to let the land rest for a while. He took them captive because they didn't honor the sabbatical year. Well, sabbatical year is every 7th year, just like we're supposed to work 6 days and rest the seventh. And papacy changed that as well. It's about Sunday because Constantine was a sun worshiper, and he made a Sunday law to keep Sunday holy. Nothing in the Bible about that. The book of Acts only has one reference to the first day of the week, and it had nothing to do about worship. Uh, Whereas the Sabbath was 9 times found in the book of Acts, and 3 times it says every Sabbath Paul was teaching in the synagogue or things like that. Well, I want to give you or suggest to you get this book, The Earthquake and Seven Seals, because when end times begin, there will be a huge earthquake, and that's the knock for the wedding in Luke 12. The Laodicean church, where Christ knocked, ended in an earthquake, and America is like that. We are lukewarm Christianity, like Revelation 3, where the Laodicean church kept Christ outside knocking. And we want to do better than that and open the door to him. When the earth quakes, it will be time for the covenant. And the 7 topics for the 7 seals you'll want to understand. So go to website healthhappinessandDestiny.com. 3 words everybody wants: health, happiness, and destiny.com. And the books are inexpensive, like a Big Mac or something. For this book, $5.95, not expensive, but God bless you. And by the way, that's a digital copy. If you have to pay more if you want it mailed to you, etc. But take a look. Love your hearts. We'll see you again next week. Thank you for considering it. God bless you, and goodbye.